of the communications team in our company headquarters. And I have to report it's a bit windy out here in San Francisco, but the sun is out. Good things. To roll call, let's check in with Marianne.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm on mute. Okay, great. Okay, Kim Barrett. George Blumenthal.
Here.
Leandra Clark-Harvey.
Present.
Isabel Duran.
Present.
Larry Goldstein.
Here.
David Higgins. Pat Levitt.
Here.
Linda Malkus.
Here.
Christine Miaskowski.
Here.
Lauren Miller-Rogan.
Here.
Jonathan Thomas.
Here.
Art Torres. It's on mute. I know I saw Art.
Art, you're on mute.
On mute.
We can record it after if we want to move forward.
Okay, got it. We have quorum. Can begin.
Thank you very much. If you could mute, I think. Thank you. Okay, we've got a nice agenda for this afternoon. Two very important things, looking at the communications plan. But first of all, I think we want to revisit what we sculpted out as our
Here.
welcome, Art. It was just coming a long distance from Northern California. So we're going to look at the mission statement that has been sculpted and determine if this meets what you think are is an expression of whom we are, what we want to accomplish, and then we'll have a discussion and a vote. So could you pull up the mission statement? I think you've all received a copy at some point in the last month. Who's pulling that up? Okay. Okay. So the statement reads, as a state agency, CIRM takes its responsibility seriously to educate the public about the programs that impact the people of California and to engage and inform them about participating in clinical trials and other scientific endeavors that CIRM supports. The Communications Subcommittee shall advise on communications with the public to help guide best practices. It will also provide recommendations to ensure effective, linguistically and culturally appropriate delivery of information to California's diverse audiences in an inclusive and equitable manner. And to fulfill this mission, the subcommittee will ensure its findings are communicated to the public, to share public feedback with the board, 4, meet quarterly, a third, and 4th, report to the board at least twice a year. And so now I'd like to open this up for discussion. Is there anything here, one, that we've missed, 2, that you feel needs to be explained just a little better? We're open, the table is open for discussion. Is there anybody with their hand up?
No,
Are you
no
all-
one's got their- Oh, now, yes, Christine Miaskowski.
Hi, Christine.
I read the strategic plan, thanks. And I guess the question I have in terms of the language in this is, what's our definition of public? Is it all the constituencies in the proposed plan?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm not sure everybody interprets public exactly the same way.
You've got a great point. So how would you recommend that we change that to put public with paren and list out?
Well,
That
it's
is
kind of bulky in that regard, right?
Yeah.
I guess if it's defined in the document that would be attached in terms of the plan, it would be okay.
the other thing, and I'm not sure since, but we might put it as the third graph before, to fulfill this mission. We could put, we define the public as, and then list those. Because I think it's really smart to have it in front of people, not have to send them all over the place looking for things. And so this might be very clear. Does anybody have any objection to that? putting in a third graph, and that would say, and that's just to fulfill this mission. Who's going to put that in? You want to see it happen right now? So can you help me with all of our different groups so that the public, we define the public as people of California. Is that good enough for you, Christine? People of California? I don't think so.
I guess what I was thinking more about was relevant constituencies.
Right.
You know, it's broader than just,
Right.
It's based on the plan. We have a lot of targets.
So we
for
could say,
our initiatives. So I just don't want to, you know, put a cog in the wheel.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think we should make it plain as everybody's nose on their face. Because some people, simple is better. Others love complexity, but let's make it direct. Would I see, Leandra, your hand is up?
I think JT's hand was up before mine, but mine is up next.
JT?
So how about instead of with the public, how about with all stakeholders?
My
There's-
suggestion was going to be another alternative. I think that's a good one too, was going to say the public, including relevant constituencies or something like that. But I think stakeholders is also, I'm fine with that.
But there are going to be some 5-year-olds are going to say, what is stakeholders and who are they?
Okay, so then my suggestion then would be to say the public, including relevant constituencies.
Well, rather than say relevant constituencies, why wouldn't we say voters, industry, scientists? Kevin's shaking his head, but
If you want to list the relevant constituencies, that's fine. But I think we open ourselves up to missing someone, and then we start, you know, then the list keeps adding. So.
but if we said to all stakeholders, including, or, you know, I just know there's a lot of, to me, there's always that question, well, who are they talking about? I
The
don't know
people
why
of
that
California is who we're talking, I mean,
Yeah, because I feel like in CIRM's mission, like the founding, like our mission of the CIRM board is it's a public, you know, entity. And so I feel like I feel like public's appropriate because it is all inclusive rather than to start to detail out and miss folks. I don't know.
and you know, I would say that the stakeholders can change. Like if you're thinking stakeholders would be those who have the greatest interest because of themselves or family members or friends and neighbors who may benefit directly. But that changes over time, right? Because that person, I mean, I think we want to target all people of California because we want everybody in California who's supporting this, and that's everybody, to know what CIRM is doing and what CIRM is about.
Or to your point, Pat, those who didn't know they were supporting, but now know that they're included. So
Yes, and all people of California or something. Right?
Yeah. I think I saw.
Isabel, I have a quick question
Sure.
just for our team.
Sure.
So the way I read this, that bullet point, ensure its findings are communicated to the public. That's the subcommittee's findings. That's not what we have set out as our strategy, correct? So that's sort of a point of differentiation between what CIRM team and CIRM agency and CIRM board is trying to communicate to the public versus what you all have then decided, you know, are the relevant points that need to get out. And I know that's just very nuanced, but I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing, that it's not that here it means the subcommittee's findings are
Right.
communicated to the public.
Right.
How do we get back to, and some of the mechanisms are these public meetings that we have now, the board meetings, and subsequent interactions that we have that are publicly available.
Right. Well, we're certainly trying to align the public we think we're addressing in communications along with those that are being served by CIRM. So I don't think we're just trying to, because we're supposedly communicating, we are just trying to be very clear in defining for different people who hear things very differently and make assumptions. We want it to be very clear for them. And maybe that's my way of seeing things. I think Art is on the phone with his hand up.
That's actually Lauren.
Lauren, sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
No worries. It's already kind of said what I was going to say, which is I think using the words, people of California is very inclusive. And
Okay.
whether you add to that, constituents of some kind or stakeholders, related stakeholders, et cetera. But I think having that very general people of California makes it really resonate with anyone who comes across that statement that is a person of California. And so I think that having that very basic language in there is very helpful.
So maybe we can, if Christine also feels good about that, maybe on the second graph, the Communications Subcommittee shall advise on communications with the public, that is all people of California? Do you want to put it there just as a reinforcement of who we're talking about when we say the public? And then not have to add a third graph.
I think that's fine.
You think that works, Christine? Okay, so have you got that, Marianne? Okay, so second graph, as I said, we'll read the Communications Subcommittee shall advise on communications with the public, that is all people of California, to help guide best practices. So we'll put it there. And is there any other feedback on the rest of this document? George, hi, welcome.
George, you're on mute.
This is a small comment, but if you go back to the first paragraph up at the top, I would like to suggest that in the second line, we change the programs to its programs. Because I don't think CIRM wants to take responsibility for all possible programs that anyone might have, but rather about its own program. So I suggest that
agree.
small change.
And we might even be really picky and say CIRM's programs.
That would be fine as well.
Sometimes it's also says it's what. So
But CIRM is mentioned twice in the sentence already, so I was trying to avoid a third mention. But
yeah. Well, they're
that's-
not going to forget us fast, George. It's
Fair
branding. That's branding. Thank you for that correction. JT, I see. I can only see 5 pictures, so I see JT. Go ahead.
So Isabel, I think going back to the last change that we made, that sounds a little cumbersome to me. I would just say simply communications with the people of California.
Shall advise on communications with the people of California rather than with the public.
With the public, that is the people of, that sounds kind of cumbersome.
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to get is the people of California. I think
So-
Lauren's suggestion was a very good one.
Yeah. Shall advise on communications with the people of California to help guide best practices.
That would be my suggestion.
Do I hear any
Might
yays?
as well.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on anything else in this very short document that hopefully is precise and gets to the point? Do you see any hands? Oh, JT. Any hands up, Maria, that I'm missing?
No, no
Or-
other hands.
Okay. So shall I call for the question?
We need a
Hey,
motion.
Can
Yes.
Isabel, before you do that, just one other thing. Do we
Right.
want to change in the first bullet, do you want to change public to people of California to be consistent with the second paragraph?
Sorry, my thing is not moving. Okay. I think we did mean to change that, but sorry. I'm in frozen mode here, so I can't see the first sentence. So somebody, do you want to read that, JT, then? Oh, there it goes. Okay, I'm unfrozen.
I'm looking at the bullet, the last paragraph, which has the 4 bullets now.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Do we want it
it-
public or not necessarily? Because you got
Sure.
public again in the second bullet.
Right.
My
You know-
recommendation would be that we make all public people of California, and then we can solve that problem. So in the mission statement, wherever it reads public, it will now read people of California.
Yes.
Does that sound good?
That's what I was suggesting, yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. So now, shall we call for the question?
I would like to move that we adopt this mission statement as amended by this discussion.
Second,
Who is that? George?
George, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Marianne, could you call the roll?
We need to ask for public comment first.
Oh, I'm sorry, sorry, so sorry. Is there someone there, Maria, any public who would like to make a comment?
I do not see any hands raised.
Very good. Thank you. Marianne, call
What about the people of California?
those people too. Are you representing those, Art?
Every day.
And do we have something to say? I've yet to hear your mellifluous voice.
Call the vote.
Call the vote, Marianne.
George Blumenthal,
Yes,
Leandra Clark Harvey,
Yes.
Isabel Duran,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein. You're on mute?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. David Higgins,
Yes.
Pat Levitt,
Yes.
Linda Malkus,
Yes.
Christine Miaskowski,
Yes.
Lauren Miller Rogan,
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres.
Hi.
Motion.
I'm sorry,
Motion
did
moves.
David give him,
He did.
sorry, because I just saw his face. I didn't.
Yes. Motion carries.
Okay, sorry, folks, I'm getting used to this unmute, mute business. Marianne is sitting right next to me. Okay, now we're going to go for the long haul into our communications plan, which is a lot of excellent work on the part of the team, and I'm going to turn that over to Maria Bonneville to launch into that.
Thank you. Can we share the document? Thanks, Marianne.
Mhm.
So thank you to the subcommittee for being here today and for going through this with us and giving us all of your much needed feedback and advice. I'm so happy that this committee has reconvened and that the team has put together a very comprehensive plan. So we look forward to sharing this with you now. So next slide, please. As always, we start all of our presentations and everything we do with the CIRM mission. Our mission is to accelerate world-class science, to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. Next slide. And as a reminder, here's the team. So Kevin McCormick is our Director of Patient Advocacy, Esteban Cortez, our Director of Marketing and Communications. You all know me, and Katie Sharifi, Communications Team Coordinator. I've just been so thrilled with how the team works together. They really are just wonderful to work with and open-minded and ready to just take on so much work that we have before us. So I'm really excited to pass this along to them now so that they can walk you through this. Esteban.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. The public outreach team is so excited to share this communication plan with you and all of the work that we've been doing to put this together. So I would really like to start by reminding everyone that this plan is very comprehensive, as Maria said, and you may have noticed that through the document we shared with you. So this will be a condensed presentation. So if you would like to see any more details, you can of course find those in the full document, which should be available to you. And our team will also be happy to clarify and answer any questions at the end of our presentation. And I do also want to emphasize that this communications plan and these strategies are part of a living, breathing document that will also be assessed and updated periodically. So let's get into it. So our presentation today will give an overview of our communications planning and research, plus outline some of the strategies moving forward. And as we got into our communications planning, the very first thing we had to ask ourselves is, why are we doing this? Why are CIRM's communications efforts so critical? And they're critical because they ensure that the most relevant information, first of all, reaches the people of California. As a state organization, it's CIRM's duty to report back to the public or the people of California on economic benefits to the state, our scientific progress, and its global impact. So this communications plan is going to set the path and the strategy in ensuring that all of our target audiences learn about the enormous impact impact on regenerative medicine that CIRM has, the scientific and educational programs we put together, as well as patient and patient advocate communities. So in our planning, we first had to ask ourselves what our big picture goals are. Like, what is it that we're trying to achieve through this plan? And here are our primary objectives. So first is to position CIRM as a trusted source of information on stem cell, gene therapy, and regenerative medicine. The goal basically is to ensure that CIRM's audiences recognize that the agency is in fact accelerating world-class science and meeting our mission. And second, CIRM will continue to work with patient advocates and community-based organizations to raise awareness about CIRM's work, services, and our impact. And this is critical because to our communications efforts, because these groups and organizations already hold a position of trust with their respective communities and will allow us to make inroads to reach them. So this is these are our big picture objectives that we're setting through the plan. So after identifying those goals that we just shared with you, the CIRM team conducted a SWOT analysis, and the purpose of this was to identify any strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to assess our position in executing this communication plan and strategy. So this is, again, a very brief snapshot of some of the items that we identified, and if you want to see more, they're, of course, in the document that we shared with you. But I would like to point out that we are already addressing some of these items, such as, if you look at the opportunity section, the opportunity to expand our outreach into communities. We'll be giving an overview of this community outreach plan shortly. And then another thing that we're addressing as an example is our large social media following, which is a strength. And we're doing that by conducting a social media audit and strategy, which Katie will also share later on in this presentation. So that's just a very brief snapshot of that SWOT analysis that we conducted. All right, so
Esteban, if you just, as JT, if you just go back, very extremely minor edit. You've got the team listed as 3 members as opposed to 4.
Yeah, sure. I guess in that case, I was referring to Katie, Kevin, and I, who are executing most of the strategy. Maria is, of course, overseeing it. So yeah, it could be 4, a team of 4 that we can edit that to.
Oh, I'll remember that, Esteban.
So thank you for that, JT. So getting into our target audiences, which is an essential component of every communications plan. So what we did is, of course, wanted to identify the target audiences. And I do want to point out that this list will grow as we periodically update this plan, but these are the ones that we've identified so far. So for this section, what we did is the team identified the audiences that we'll target through our communications, as well as some of the messages that we'll share with them. So you will notice that there's some overlap in the key messages as we go through the slides. So we won't go into great detail, but again, there are some key messages that we've identified in the document if you want to take a look. So as our first target audience, we have, of course, the people of California, arguably one of our most important audiences because they are the reason that CIRM exists today and was funded again through Prop 14. So while the work that CIRM does impacts the world, it's absolutely critical that we first share relevant information with Californians about scientific research, clinical trials, and the importance of regenerative medicine. And our team absolutely recognizes that California is a diverse state with many different communities and ethnic groups. And we recognize that messaging for Californians is not one size fits all and that it must be culturally and linguistically appropriate. Moving on to the You're muted, Isabel, sorry.
We know this is a pretty large deck, and part of me is thinking, am I going to remember at the end of this what I might have to say, because it is dense with information. Would it be appropriate for us to maybe have a comment? I mean, I'm sure everybody all the time is not going to say it, but as we go along, Esteban, would that bother you? Is that our pro forma here? How do you feel, Esteban?
Yeah, I think that if anybody has any questions, we're welcome to answer anything as needed. We are also happy to answer at the end of the presentation. So if any questions do come up, feel free to ask.
Okay, yeah, because the part of me wants to say something now instead of wait. In 10 slides, I'm going to totally forget what I was so smartly thinking.
Okay, yeah. If there's a question that you have, Isabel, feel free to chime in.
So I just want the whole subcommittee to understand that so they can feel free to raise their hand. And please, I hope I see it. Thank you, Esteban. Continue.
Leandra has her hand raised, as does Larry.
So now that you've invited questions, so on this slide, I'm wondering, so there's statements, right? So you say key messages, and so there's a statement, it's created, funding is important, but then there's a question, what is regenerative medicine and why is it important to me? It seems like that to me would be more appropriate for like a FAQ, or just make it consistent, right? We have 3 kind of, or 4 statements and then 1 question. It just seems to be a little off in terms of how it's presented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to point out, and our team wants to point out, that this will be a document that will be assessed periodically and updated. So we are still refining some of those messages. Like, I think what we really are going to do is we're going to get together. So for that topic that you are mentioning about regenerative medicine, we are going to have to figure out what exactly are those key things that we want to share about regenerative medicine. So yes, I absolutely agree with your comment, and that is something that we will be refining.
I see Lawrence also has his hand up. Larry?
Yeah, thanks. I think what's missing here for me is to say something a bit more directly about medical and scientific research at CIRM is improving and changing the lives of people every day, or something to that effect, to bring it a little bit more in line with the sorts of things we said during the campaign to get this piece passed.
Yeah, and to that, I would also just reiterate that thing that we are going to be refining some of these messages. So as we're getting into campaigns, we will, of course, determine like what is it exactly that we want to say. What are those important points around how regenerative medicine affects communities? And as we get into our community outreach strategy, which will be coming up, we're going to find that messages are different as we get to communities, because, for example, one community might value a certain set of information more than another. There might be a disease area that affects one community more than the other. So these are just general messages that will be expanded upon as we get into.
We lost you, Esteban.
Okay, sorry, I just got a pop-up. But yeah, really just wanted to say that we're going to be refining these as we get into more specific campaigns.
I want to differentiate between, we're used to big campaign, and that was the one that happened in 2020. Esteban was referring to continued marketing strategies and specific outreach that we're doing and targeted. So if, when there's a new RFA and we're asked to send out an email to make sure that everybody understands that there's a new RFA, that's referred to as a campaign. How did that do? How many people opened the email? Things like that. And that's how we track metrics. So I just wanted to differentiate between big campaign and then the campaigns that we talk about within this group.
Thank you, Maria.
JT, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One is, I think ordering of the messages when you're reading this is important. I would move what is regenerative medicine and why is it important to me up to number 2, because that's kind of a threshold thing that everything follows from that. The second point I wanted to make is that last bullet is, which I realize you can't go into any detail on these things, but sort of brings clinical trials as kind of a large understatement, I believe. I mean, we're closing in on 80 now, which is a huge number, and you don't get the benefit of that from the way that's phrased. So I would do something to somewhat augment that to reflect the major advances that we've had as far as the number of clinical trials in place.
Thank you, JT.
I think Esteban, what he's saying is we need to make sure we capture our history to give people context, even while we push ahead into the new frontier. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions before I move on?
Just a quick suggestion. I actually think that all of this is related to this fundamental bullet on number 4. What is regenerative medicine? Why is it important to me? So I feel like that should be the header. What is regenerative medicine? Why is it important to me? Under which could follow the comments that JT just put out that I agree with. this is CIRM, this is, this is what regenerative medicine is, this is, and the clinical trials piece too. I almost feel like those are an answer to that question, and to that question being like kind of muddled in there. I'll stop now. I know you have to move on, but.
Oh, no, thank you. This is all feedback that's valued. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Any other questions? So we'll go ahead and move through these target audiences. So yeah, again, as I'm getting through some of these slides, just keep in mind that these will be refined and these are general messages that we've identified, and there are some expanded questions that or key messages that we've identified through the plan itself. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, please, Marianne. All right, so as we're getting into our target audiences, another target audience consists of patients and patient advocate communities, of course. And this audience remains an important one because CIRM would not exist today if it were not for the tireless efforts of patients and patient advocates. And Kevin will be giving an overview of our patient advocacy strategy later in this presentation. The next up, we've got the media, which provides opportunities for CIRM to spread information with further reach, sometimes even on a worldwide scale. It is worth mentioning that when we say media, we don't just mean traditional newspapers and TV stations, because media has changed so much over the years and is constantly evolving. When we say media, that also includes things like bloggers, podcasters, as well as community publications. Okay. Another clear audience is, of course, the scientific community. As a science funding agency, this is absolutely one of CIRM's key audiences. By targeting scientific communities, CIRM gets access to the best science and research to fund, and many science institutions also have a wide reach and help with spreading awareness of CIRM and its programs. So that's, of course, why this remains a key audience. Okay. Then our team is also developing messaging to target the industry and business community in collaboration with Shyam Patel, who is CIRM's Director of Business Development. And some of the key messages that we've identified so far are, of course, around awareness of our Industry Alliance program and to position CIRM as a world leader in regenerative medicine and stem cell research. And then CIRM also maintains a strong relationship with state and federal lawmakers, due in large part to the work of our vice chair and members of the CIRM team. And CIRM keeps this audience up to date on programs, economic impact, and general information. And this all helps with building awareness of the important work that CIRM is doing. And then finally, we've got the medical community as a target audience. And for this group, the public outreach team is working with CIRM's new Vice President of Medical Affairs and Policy, Sean Turbeville, to identify more key messages and support with that outreach strategy. Okay, so that wraps up the snapshot of some of...
Esteban?
Yeah.
Sorry. The only thing I keep looking for and not seeing, and maybe it's hidden inside that, is, are we making sure that all of the students, the interns, those in our Spark program and the Bridges program, that they're also hearing about themselves and about the program, but also hearing about each other, so they can be part of this community we're talking about and feel very not only enthused about being part of it, but hopefully talk outward to their networks. How do we encourage that kind of communication about between and out? I'm not sure if I saw it someplace in here.
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't listed in these slides, but that is something that we are developing. We're developing a toolkit, and we're really looking for a way to streamline our content gathering and the way that we do share stories, because it's clear that there really is no shortage of content through those programs. And we have already started to meet with some of the program directors. Like, for example, we met with somebody down in San Diego area from Sanford Burnham Prebys, who gave us some really great insight on ways that we can start to streamline that content. And this was actually a great suggestion that Leandra also suggested last time about building a toolkit, which is something that's on our to-do list. Because yeah, that's the thing, is we want to, as I mentioned, we are a short team, a small team. So we want to find ways to streamline that and get that content coming over to us so that we can continue to share it across all of our channels. So that is something that we will be addressing through our content strategy.
Isabel, one other thing, both the Spark and Bridges program have a conference every year where they bring all the kids together. So all the participants in the Bridges and all the participants in Spark. So at least once a year they do share stories, there's poster sessions, all of those things where they get to know each other. And there is then that also that ability for us to capture those stories when we're there and create content and content generation from there. So there should be a mechanism by which they can interact more. So we'll talk to the program directors about that, but they do have at least that one intersection that once a year.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm saying once a year isn't good enough. We all know that, right? But I appreciate developing content for over time, but I'm thinking in their own consistent opportunity to hear and know about each other. I just feel it builds the village.
Pat has his hand raised.
Yeah, so I'm going to send comments on the various pages because I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. But one thing that I wanted to raise is, there's a lot in here in terms of target audiences and goals, et cetera, and it's it's great, but I'm worried about an absence of determining whether the words we use and the messages that we develop, the content, the material, et cetera, will actually resonate with the various audiences. That we don't have a process for vetting the impact of how we're going to say what we say. And I say that because there's a lot of words in here that I think in general are not going to resonate with people who are not scientists. And so I think we have to put that on the table in terms of determining what is the process going to be in determining the effectiveness of the messages themselves for the specific audiences. And that can be done in a whole variety of ways, but there's got to be some way to determine how effective they are before we use them and use them in widespread way. And what works for policymakers doesn't necessarily work for community advocacy groups, and certainly not the scientists. And what works with them may not work at all with some of the target audiences that you've identified. So
that's correct, Pat. And part of that comes into play with our outreach plans and strategies of going into the communities, the community-based organizations, the patient advocate communities, the patients themselves, and having conversations with them and understanding sort of where what do they need to know from us? How do we communicate with their constituencies directly? Like, what's the best methodology? What the understanding is, what they want from us, because we can make assumptions that, we need to go in and educate everyone. That may not be true. So it really comes down to having these conversations with the different constituencies and the key stakeholders in those constituencies that can then be our voices in the community as well. So I totally agree that not every message is going to work with every constituency. There's no way. Getting to that is going to be a work in progress, and really is going to, I'm not sure we can get there until we start having these very pointed conversations.
Yeah, I'm not talking about doing immediately. I'm talking about instituting a process, and not to get all science nerdy, but the best way of knowing whether something works or not is to collect the data. In those conversations, there are methods to do that, and I just can't overestimate. I mean, it's really, really critically important because we tend to not, we meaning scientists, I can't speak for everyone else on this call, tend to do a lousy job. We tend to do a lousy job at communicating what we do in a way that resonates with people who we're talking to. It's not about us defining what we want to say to them. I mean, we know the kinds of things we want to say to them, but how we say that and what resonates with them is really important. And collecting that information, not just through conversation, but other methods. I think they're communication methods, and I think we have to do that, or we may end up with some things that work extremely well with certain groups and fall flat on its face with other groups. And I'd like to avoid that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Pat, I just I just wanted to address that. That is something we are already doing through our social media audit, for example. We're auditing our content and looking at data. So Katie will actually get into that, but we have looked at posts, content that does resonate with people and is more engaging. And that's something we'll continue to do.
So Esteban, let me call time here. We've got about 45 minutes left. So we want to make sure we get everybody in. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I'm happy to move on. We have, now that we're done with going over the target audiences, we're just going to get into the overview of our strategies. And I think we should be good on time.
Okay, somebody has their hand.
Christine has her hand
Sorry,
raised.
Christine, I can't see everybody's hand. Sorry,
Sorry, folks.
Christina.
One short comment about audiences, Esteban. I really appreciate your presentation, but I'm wondering if there's openness to revising the term medical community. To me, that's typically physicians. And I think we want to be broader than that. And I'm wondering if there'd be openness to saying like healthcare community, which would bring, because I'll bet dollars to donuts, nurses, psychologists, other health professionals are going to be critical to delivering the messages from CIRM.
Okay.
And that would be really, really, I think, important in terms of our constituencies to represent it more broadly.
Thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
JT?
Yes,
Maria's watching for me.
very quickly, Esteban, being mindful of time. Can you just flash back to each one of these target audience slides? I have a question. I think I missed something on one of them. Next. Okay, never mind. You got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay. Okay, great. So that does wrap up the snapshot of our key target audiences. Thank you everyone for that feedback. And now that we've given you an overview of our communications planning and some of these big picture objectives, including our audiences, here's some of the immediate initiatives that we're focusing on. And we'll start first with an overview of CIRM's community outreach strategy.
But Esteban, one more thing I wanted to say just about Pat's comment about scientists being not necessarily great communicators. I want to give a specific shout out to Larry, who, having been to years worth of ISSCRs and seen presentations by numerous scientists on different things that were chock full of stuff, but basically impenetrable. Larry does a wonderful job of explaining things in English. So, so as we go about trying to access, to the extent you want input on how a scientist might present something that's understandable to the various stakeholders, I would strongly recommend running as much as you can by Larry, because he absolutely has that down.
Thank you, JT. I'm happy to help in that way if you need it.
And I was going to say, and after you get the English done, we have to worry about those other languages because there are nuances. But thank you. We'll start with you, Larry. Lots of work ahead.
Thank you, JT. So getting into our community outreach strategy, as a state agency created by the people of California, it is CIRM's duty to educate people of California, the public, about our impact across the state, the importance of regenerative medicine, and how our work benefits California's diverse population. So CIRM has already done lots of work to reach scientific and patient advocate communities, but we absolutely recognize that we need to expand our outreach to historically underrepresented communities and geographic areas across the state. This includes community-based organizations, CBOs. And as CIRM's focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion grows, this community outreach strategy will guide us in making sure that Californians get the information that most affects them. So like our communications plan, one of the first things we did for SWRM's community outreach strategy is identify these communities and populations that we're talking about. So the communications plan document includes a glossary of some of these terms and how we identified these groups, many of which were identified through the US Census and other federal measuring tools. And populations and communities that we'll conduct outreach to include Latin, Hispanic, Black, African American, Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI, Native American, people with disabilities, retirees, LGBTQ+, and economically disadvantaged. And of course, it's worth mentioning that this list is likely to grow as we start to conduct this outreach and update this strategy. So we mentioned that community-based organizations will be a major part of conducting our outreach. So this is just a snapshot of the types of CBOs that we've already identified and that we intend to connect with. And they're segmented by geographic areas. So again, these are organizations that understand their constituents and hold a position of trust, and they'll be key in helping SWRM gain insights into communities and partnership opportunities. And we mentioned in the SWOT analysis that geographic barriers remain a challenge for the SWRM team in reaching these communities. But with new digital tools like Zoom, social media, that'll allow us to reach into these communities, whether they're geographically, far and across the state. So now that we've identified these CBOs and communities, let's get into the community outreach strategy itself. So we will, of course, continue to leverage existing relationships with CBOs, patient advocates, and community leaders to make inroads into new communities. So these include CBOs like the California Primary Care Association and, of course, patient advocates that Kevin has worked with over the years. And we are also very excited to utilize the services of Jacqueline Hangen, Senior Advisor of Community Outreach and Engagement, to connect with CBOs and community leaders. And just as a reminder, Jacqueline was pivotal in conducting outreach for the Prop 14 campaign, and we're very excited to be working with her again. So we will also develop a community outreach survey, utilize social media to gain insights, and use SWRM's community care centers of excellence to reach these new communities. And finally, we will assess and measure our community outreach successes and challenges periodically to update the strategy accordingly. And this strategy, in the end, the strategy will enable SWRM to deploy additional outreach and marketing tactics based on the insights and partnership opportunities we identify through these conversations. And this is just a very quick snapshot of some of the questions. There's a longer list in the plan itself, but these are the types of questions we'll be asking community leaders. We, of course, want to find out about language preferences, the information that they want to know around regenerative medicine, disease-focused research. And we anticipate that throughout these conversations, we'll find that there actually isn't really a lot of awareness around regenerative medicine, which is also valuable to us, because that shows that maybe we need to build an awareness campaign or something along those lines. So that's just again a very quick snapshot of the types of questions we'll ask. And really, in terms of next steps to this strategy, our goal is to, just like our communications plan, it's to position SWRM as a trusted resource for communities. And for us, really ensuring that communities feel seen, heard, and valued is the first step in building trust and relationships. So all of these insights that we gather will give us a better understanding of the messages and the information that communities value. And ultimately, this will allow us to develop those outreach and marketing campaigns that we have in mind. So that concludes our community outreach strategy overview. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. So next up, Katie will be giving an overview of our social media strategy. Katie?
Thank you, Esteban, and thank you everyone for being here today. I will briefly go over our social media strategy because we can't talk about our communications plan and outreach without first talking about social media. Social media is so important to CIRM's marketing communication efforts because it really gives us that widest outreach to the most diverse audience. And at the same time, social media can be a learning tool for us ourselves to educate ourselves about different communities, listen to them, and find out what's important to them. So in a nutshell, it's not only essential, it's inexpensive, and social media also allows us to tailor our messages to different audiences based on the platform that we're utilizing. So in the first step, can you go to the next slide, please? The first step to our social media audit, social media strategy, was to conduct an audit. We actually talked about this a little bit at the meeting last time. If you remember, we mentioned that we will be conducting this audit, and we're happy to report that it's been completed. So for those of you that don't know, like myself in the beginning, social media audit is the process of reviewing your business's metrics to assess growth, to see what's working, what's not working, who's engaging with us, where there are new opportunities to grow and engage with new audiences. And this audit for us entailed many tasks, which you can see a snapshot of on the right. Many tasks from small ones, like ensuring that our branding is consistent across all platforms, to some bigger and more time-consuming tasks like gathering metrics, insights from each platform, and also creating a system to record and track all of it. We gathered audience and stakeholder feedback. We went and even looked at some of our competitors and industry friends to see what they're doing well, what we would like to emulate, and what, of course, we'd like to avoid. We went back 2-3 years, gathered and analyzed all this data to look for patterns, which is really important for us because it's through these patterns, these insights, that we can find out which platform is right for us to focus on at what point, based on the audience that we're trying to reach. So can you go to the next slide, please? For this audit, we chose to focus on 4 main platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And these are the main platforms that CIRM has been most active on. And part of the reason why we wanted to make it so focused is because it's actually a rookie error to try and exist on all social media platforms, because in that case, what you end up doing when you try to sprinkle yourself across all these channels, you don't actually end up with having the resources to create those really engaging and meaningful posts and content and messages that your audience is really going to connect with. And so what we did in this audit was to look at our four main platforms. We over time saw that there's certain content that gets certain action, some content that gets no action. We started to notice that there are certain posts that perform better than others in certain areas on certain platforms. And that's what, in a nutshell, we found out was that, and I think, Pat, you also sort of alluded to it a bit, what we have seen is that, for example, on Facebook, we get a lot of questions and messages about clinical trials. People find stories that are patient-focused. They like stories that are about patient advocates, personal stories. Those are the things that actually drive a lot of traffic to our blog. And then looking at some of the other platforms, for example, Instagram is where we really want to start becoming more active, because that's where our younger audiences are. So there was a mention of our Bridges and our Spark students, and that's where we'd like to really reach out to them, get those high quality images, those dynamic posts to get that engagement with our younger audiences. And so these metrics, these analytics that we've gathered through this audit are really going to help guide our next steps as we move on. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the next steps, first and foremost, we have to develop a content strategy. Again, Esteban went over this a bit. That's streamlining all our content strategy, developing a toolkit, a social media calendar, really learning which platform does the best with what type of messaging, so that we can have this all on hand before we go in there and we start with the next steps. And what we really want to do is that we want to also really focus our social media efforts into reaching out into the community and following CBOs, gathering more feedback, getting to know what these audiences want, what kind of content really they identify with. And as always, we're going to continue monitoring and assessing the website, the blog, and as well as all the social media platforms to measure the traffic and to see that we are meeting the goals that we've set for ourselves, as well as if there's anything we need to tweak along the way, if we're doing everything as effectively as we can. That is all coming up for us in our next steps. And with that said, I am going to, unless there are any questions, hand it off to Kevin McCormick, who's going to go over our media plan strategy.
So hang on a minute, Kevin. Let's make sure there are no questions out there.
Currently, there are no hands raised, but that doesn't mean there won't be.
Okay, Kevin.
Thank you, Isabel. And thank you, Katie. Can you hear me? Cool, great. So just as Katie was talking about our social media strategy and that being important to the way we work. So our mainstream media strategy is important as well. And by mainstream media, I mean newspapers, TV, radio. I know they faced a lot of challenges over the last few years with layoffs and closures, but they're still one of the most effective ways of getting a message out and a story out to the mainstream public all over California. So they still have to be really important. And I know there's a lot of kind of allegations about and talk about fake news, but studies show that the mainstream media is still considered more reliable and trustworthy than most of the online sites. So mainstream media clearly represents an important area for us to keep using. And we're going to do that by continuing to identify the reporters who are interested in stem cell, gene therapy, regenerative medicine, and pitching them story ideas. We also want to position ourselves as a trusted third-party source. So if they're looking for someone to comment on new developments, they can turn to us. And we can help provide them with that comment, either ourselves or by directing them to someone who's important as well. So next slide, please. But because of our increased emphasis on DEI, we're adjusting our media strategy to reflect that as well. And by that, I mean, we're going to be reaching out to more community-based media outlets. And there's a lot of these around. You have the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint, which serves the Black community in that city. You have Tsingtao, which serves the Asian community all over California. And then you have TV networks like Univision, which often have the largest share of the news market in some of the big cities in California. So clearly, these represent a big opportunity for us to get stories in. And because they're trusted outlets, if we get a story about the work we're funding, then it has an impact. And that can serve a number of things. One, it may raise awareness about what we're doing. But two, it may also help kind of dispel some of the mistrust that some communities have about the health service, the medical service. Thank you. And then, of course, there's the patient advocate community. I mean, I think it's fair to say that without them, CIRM wouldn't be here. They've been champions of everything we've done over the years, and they're certainly instrumental in getting Propositions 71 and 14 passed. So we have an obligation, a responsibility to keep them involved in what we're doing and to report back to them regularly. In the past, one of the ways we've helped serve the patient advocate community is by focusing on disease-specific areas. So, for example, we would do a Facebook Live on stroke recovery or leukemia or some of the other areas that we're funding. Or we would do in-person presentations to support groups for Parkinson's, ALS, autism, many of those different areas. And we're going to continue doing that, but also now we want to expand that to be even more community focused. And so one of the ways we want to do this is by, and maybe Pat, this addresses some of the questions you raised earlier about identifying one community, say the sickle cell disease community, and using that and our communications with that and our work with that to help build experience, develop messaging, and test best practices. We want to do this by surveying the key opinion leaders within that community and working with them to understand how best we can serve them, how best we can collaborate with them to develop information that the members, their supporters might be interested in, to be able to communicate that in a way with them that may help them. Obviously, this is all about us listening to what communities are saying and not going in and just saying, here's what we want to do. We want to go in and say, how do we help you? How do we help support the work that you're doing and help communicate to your members and the public in general, how best we can serve them? And again, this will serve a number of different purposes. One, hopefully help raise awareness about us and the work we're doing and the fact that it's due to the people of California that we're able to do that. But also, again, able to dispel some of the kind of the mistrust that surrounds medical and health services. And so with that, I'll hand it back unless we have questions. JT.
Kevin, what is the excuse me, the current status sorry, of the science media in the mainstream press? Is it continued to diminish over the years, or is it stabilized? Or
I think pretty much all of the science media has been impacted over the years, particularly, say, the mainstream media. When you look at, say, the major newspapers around California, indeed around the US, there are fewer and fewer specialist health reporters. We're fortunate here in the San Francisco Bay Area, having the San Francisco Chronicle and Erin Alday, who's one of the few really truly dedicated health and medical reporters who's still around. But again, over the last couple of years, her work has been almost entirely COVID-based. And you can see the same patterns in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Sacramento, and in the Central Valley as well, with the Fresno Bee and places like that. So the kind of the specialist reporter is an endangered species in many areas. The science media is more amenable to reporting about us, but they're often kind of results driven. And so they're looking at specific clinical trials or developments in that. So we do definitely work with them. But opportunities to place stories in there are not as plentiful as we would have hoped.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, excuse me, I know you're doing outreach, and we mentioned CBOs, but I didn't hear that, how you're going to start building that relationship with the CBOs, because there's a news line directly through that as well.
The CBOs is a whole new area. We're working now with Jacqueline Handkin, who's our senior advisor, and she's going to be helping us develop a specific strategy to reaching out to those. And in a way, it's part and parcel of the patient advocacy. The idea is you develop a connection. And if you see me looking off to the side, it's because Isabel, Dr. Duran, as I call her, is just sitting over there. Is to develop messages that work for specific groups and specific communities. So because some of these CBOs are very specialized and have a very kind of targeted audience, and so we have to be equally specialized and targeted in the way we develop that. So I think the idea was that we would start with, say, one community, like the sickle cell disease community, and use that as a way of a kind of a test case to help us develop messaging, to help us develop a best way to approach even some of these CBOs, so that we don't come in looking as if we're kind of like the kind of big footing in and saying, here's what we want to do with you, that we go in and we're able to kind of create a rapport with them. And so they understand what it is we're trying to do.
Yeah, because there's a whole statewide group called Latinos Against COVID, and they are really representative of a number of CBOs, as well as academicians, as well as researchers, as well as the of physicians. And so there is a real nice test case as well. So any other questions out there?
I have a question, but I don't see a hand raised.
Oh,
you just did, David. You just waited.
Is it?
Yeah.
Kevin, how do you propose to drive the mandate that we've been given with this proposition, so that something like 1.5 billion of the 5 billion, roughly speaking, is dedicated towards a certain area? How do you monitor that, measure that, make that happen, and find out whether it helps in the long run, so to know whether to do it the next time? I'm obviously biased and thinking about Parkinson's, but I get asked almost daily, what's going on? Where's the low-hanging fruit that you guys promised us 15 years ago or whatever? So,
right. Happily, I don't have to monitor money or any of those things. I mean, my financial acumen is pretty low. So they leave that with people who know what they're doing. Mine is all about the messaging. I'm working with people. And so when we do go out and give talks to Parkinson's support groups or ALS support groups or other groups, we're able to point to that 1.5 billion as a kind of a dedicated resource that we can use to really target the diseases within those communities, the things that are affecting the people within those communities. We can talk about some of the work we're funding, some of the work we're hoping to fund as well. I mean, this kind of pipeline that we're creating of projects that we're moving from through the discovery, translational, hopefully into the clinical phase. So that's what I talk about when I go out and talk to the public about this is the kind of money that we're able to dedicate, to devote to this kind of research.
And do you imagine doing something like, just selfishly, because I understand it, but Lauren and I going out and having some kind of event or whatever, and because of the nature of what she represents and what I represent being so close?
Absolutely. I'd love to be able to kind of tap into to tap into all the skills of our board members. I mean, we have so many who have reaches into different communities, and Dr. Clark Harvey into the mental health community. I mean, these are great opportunities if we can use those. I'm mindful of your time, of course, and so I don't want to do too much. But yes, you're volunteering, David. I'll give you a call.
That's what we're on the planet for. Don't hold back. Don't hold back. I'll speak for myself. I mean, don't hold back.
Okay.
Yeah.
fantastic.
George?
Just a follow-up to JT's comment about the scientific press. I wonder whether it might be useful to reach out to some of the training programs, for example, science communication programs in California, of which there are at least a couple, and offer the services of CIRM as a way of getting more connection to students who are about to enter the scientific communication realm.
We've done that in the past. We actually used to have a science communications internship, and mostly it was filled with people from Santa Cruz, which has a wonderful science communications program. We've also worked with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a lot of science journalists are part of that. So we've gone to conferences with them and worked with them and helped develop some kind of connections to try and advance it. But yeah, that's a great idea, kind of getting in younger people and working with them and helping support them, give them ideas, and maybe even if we can revive that internship program again, that would be a wonderful opportunity.
JT.
Yeah, just following on that, Kevin, in our last conversation, we talked about potentially reaching out to high school and junior high science teachers and having a dedicated effort to reach them, because that's a way to get a direct pipeline of what we're trying to get across straight to the kids, which is something that will benefit more and more as we go forward. I didn't see that in there, as I assume that's contemplated someplace.
It's definitely contemplated. It's one of those things that there's so much in that plan that trying to kind of prioritize it is really complicated. And we're doing certain things that we can right now. Katie, the other day, wrote a blog about DNA Day, about a program that was developed to help teach high school kids and younger kids as well how to do their own DNA experiments using alcohol, strawberries, and some kind of really easy to find things. And so doing stories like that and then sharing that with the kind of the educators community is one way we're trying to do that. But again, it's certainly something we want to do. But again, it's a question of, as Esteban said, we're a small team, short, about 5'7" on average, but damn proud, and we're going to work as hard as we can to make sure we meet all these different tasks over the years.
And not to pass over the work that's already going on at many of these places, food bridges and that kind of thing, where they're now required to go and talk to a person with a specific disease and report on that and actually put a human face on that. And I think that's not, it hasn't been ignored, but I think the value of that, which I think is tremendous, absolutely phenomenal, is underappreciated. I think we could do more of the patient-student kind of thing.
Yeah, in fact, Dr. Duran and myself went to San Jose State just a couple of weeks ago and talked to the Bridges students there. And for most of them, the public outreach event that they were going to be doing was going back to their old high school and talking to students there, because they want to kind of create that connection. And some of them were really, it was really interesting to hear them talk about how when they were there, someone inspired them and they wanted to go back to be able to try and do that same thing with other students to help inspire them and show that someone who looks like them, and in most cases, these were people of color, women of color at San Jose State, wanted to go back and be able to show that, you know, this is possible. So look at me, I'm doing this. So we're certainly working with the Bridges program to try and do that. And also we work with, obviously, with the Spark programs, because they're all based in high schools. And so working with them to try and get the word out to all the other high schools and the potential students who will come in. That's clearly a really important part of what we do. And to be honest, it's one of the most fun parts. The Bridges program and the Spark program are really some of the most interesting places to work.
Leandra has her hand raised.
Leandra.
Yes, I also wanted to point out that we have right here at the state capitol, in and around the capitol, we have the California Council on Science and Technology. I don't know if you all have had conversations with them. I was a CCST fellow, but these are scientists that have an interest in public policy that come to work in the legislature or in various different administrative offices and departments, et cetera. So there might be an ability to partner with them to spread the news, because obviously those that are interested in the program are scientists, they've been trained, but they also have the ability to communicate science. I think someone has their, they also have the ability to communicate science within a political atmosphere. So maybe just an idea, a suggestion.
Right. So what was that name again, Leandra?
CCST, California Council on Science and Technology.
Science and Technology. Thank you so much.
Well, I think as we're learning, there's plenty out there.
Yes.
There will be no shortage of work for short people who are mighty,
Yes.
So go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Art. You and the people of California.
Yes, I'm sorry. No, just one people. It's hard when you're just on the phone, but It's a program that we started a few years ago that I started at CIRM, where we were working with the Gordon Moore Foundation to bring in young people and assign them with backgrounds in science, PhDs especially, to various committees in the legislature so they could get input. The previous vice chair, who was part of CIRM, and I worked on that together, 13 years ago. And so the program has proven very successful because it allows people to have input that otherwise would not have been being able to give a perspective to the legislators who are not scientists.
And in fact, thanks to Art, we actually had a scientific intern in, I think it was Senator Hernandez's office some years ago. And she was able to kind of work with us to help get past a law requiring some of these kind of bogus or predatory stem cell clinics to have a sign in their office saying none of these therapies have been vetted or approved by the FDA. So that was a really useful thing. It was great to be able to work with someone in the legislative office there on a daily basis to get that done.
And this is all done with not CIRM funds, but with foundation funds, which was great.
So is that still active? Or Kevin, are you seeing any cross?
That was the program that I was just mentioning. He was expounding upon it, but yes, it's definitely still active.
I saw Pat's hand up.
I was going to say one other thing to think about is, and you know, there are folks on the board and on the subcommittee that are excellent science communicators. Is to think about how to develop a small cadre of scientists who represent different areas that are supported by CIRM to actually gain some science communication experience and then utilize them in various ways. Make it a diverse group. And for CIRM to help organize, there are ways of doing that in terms of workshops and other things that would be really helpful. Most of us don't have formal or even informal communication skills. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years in doing a lot of public talks, a lot of policy talks, is that for a scientist, an active scientist who also learns how to communicate the science, it resonates so unbelievably powerful with all sorts of audiences, hearing from the scientists themselves. So I think that's something that could be grown. It would also help in terms of some of the materials that are like currently on the website that that I assume you're going to refresh in terms of the communication posts.
Yeah, and in the past, Pat, when we would have grantee meetings, we would actually have a special session to help work with the scientists, postdocs, anyone who's interested in developing good communication skills. We put them through a series of drills, a series of tests to help them refine the skills, get more comfortable talking about science in public to non-scientific people. We also did an elevator challenge where you had to kind of present a summary of your work in 30 seconds or less to be able to kind of be really good at it. And some of the scientists were great. Some of them couldn't say hello in 3 minutes, but a lot of the younger ones in particular were really good at being able to kind of condense what they did into these little presentations. And so they took the really good skills. And if we get opportunities to do that again, we'd be more than happy to have another workshop like that.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm sorry, we do. Stefan?
Yeah, I was just going to say we just have a couple of slides left, so just to get through the rest of the presentation, and then we're happy to answer any other questions as needed. JT, is that okay if we get to your question in a bit?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you, Kevin, for that patient overview, patient advocate strategy. And just before we finish off our presentation, I would like to quickly point out that those aforementioned strategies are in addition to the ongoing projects and initiative that we're working on. If you could go to the next slide, Marianne. So these projects include our email marketing stem cell seller blog, which by the way was recently recognized as one of the top stem cell and gene therapy research blogs, our CIRM podcast, the website, brand strategy, as well as display advertising. So those are things that we're also working on in addition to those strategies that we just mentioned. And with that, if you go to the last slide, Marianne. Before we move on to our final questions and discussion, I just want to thank you all on behalf of the CIRM and the public outreach team for being here and listening to our presentation. We're really excited to get to work, and we're confident that we can meet these goals through these comprehensive strategies. So we look forward to any feedback and answering any further questions that you all may have.
JT?
Oh, he disappeared.
Oh,
He's been having Wi-Fi issues, so that might be
okay.
it.
Okay. Does anybody else have other comments to make on anything we saw? I only have one comment. One of the things that I feel is that the board itself doesn't have a great communication strategy. In other words, we don't know enough. I mean, we're asked to come to meetings and we're asked to vote on things, but do we know enough about all of these things that are happening? I'm going to put Katie on the spot. Katie on the spot. She did this fabulous newsletter for internal communications so that the staff learns about each other and what's on their plate and where they're going and what they're doing. And I just wondered if the board couldn't have something like that. We have a lot of new members. We have a lot of new members.
Yeah. Isabel.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. We would be happy to do that. We were doing a board newsletter up until around the refunding, and then things I think got a little crazy, but we are so happy to bring that back and have that be a monthly newsletter that goes to the board or quarterly, whatever the board feels is enough frequency, but not too much, that, you know, you have time to read and absorb and ask questions about. So we're totally open to that. So you just let us know. And that's something that we can get started.
So let Christine go ahead. Maybe she wants to comment on that, and maybe we can show a hands or something that people like that idea, as if they need more stuff in their inbox. But there's another part of me that says, we're kind of curious to know what's going on. Christine.
I would welcome getting the newsletter because I came on after it was stopped. I think this is a terrific comprehensive plan. I want to say that. It covers the landscape. But the question I had was, given your mighty team of 3 or 4, depending on how you count, what are the priorities and what are the metrics of success? How can we think about, you know, where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck, in a sense? And maybe you haven't gotten there yet, but that might be a conversation for us to have collectively at some point. Because I do think the plan is extraordinary. I don't want to discount it in any way, shape, or form. But
yeah. we do actually have metrics. So for all of the goals, we have our strategy, but we also have measurable goals. We've been very mindful about doing that so that we don't just say, and then we want to do this, this, and this. We really do want to be very specific about targets that we're going to be reaching. For example, how many patient advocate organizations we reach out to in a given period, how many media relations people we pitch a story to, how many, and then of course, Katie and Esteban can monitor and track all of our social media metrics and have a really good idea which messages are hitting home, which ones aren't, and new strategies to evolve. So that's certainly something, metrics and keeping kind of a clear idea about not just what we're doing, but if it's working is really a big part of what we're doing.
I apologize if I missed those in the plan, but
it's a very big plan and there's a lot of detail in there. So
I appreciate you raising that. I appreciate you raising that, Christine, because first we need to give thanks to this fabulous work that you did. I know it was very labor intensive, but this is exactly where we need to start kind of baseline, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're pulling up all the rocks, we're looking up underneath the covers, we're trying to determine and where we go next. So I really appreciate the work that they have done. Does anybody else want to make a comment? Or let me ask first, the pictures I can see, do we want to vote on whether you really encourage them to do a newsletter?
Before anyone votes, I think you ought to know that one of the most popular parts of our internal newsletter is baby photos. So if you do vote in favor, we expect to see baby photos.
Well, or substitute animals or something like that. Hand show of hands, newsletter. Even send, I would suggest that maybe we even send some news for posting about ourselves or about something that went on. I think that would color the communications, if you will. So I don't know if anybody's missing from that count, but it looks like there's a lot of favorables to go. Oops, did I just lose?
I'll say I didn't vote for it because I would like to know if this is onerous or would take too much time from the staff. I just don't have a sense of that. So if this is something that can simply be done and isn't a big task, then yes. But if it's going to take extra time, then it's not necessary for me personally.
We're already doing a lot of this news gathering and information gathering anyway, Leandra, so it wouldn't really be too much extra work. I mean, we'd be dependent on board members sending us information about things that they'd like to know about. But I think with Maria, with Marianne, with Stephanie and the other members of the team that support all this, we could certainly do that, I think.
I hope they all agree with you. Okay, yes.
I'd like to volunteer people. All right.
Maybe a trial. Maybe we try it and see if it works. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be a nice surprise for some board members, particularly those who are new and who still need to get to know each other while we're trying to figure out the bigger picture. So any other comments or questions? Oh, I see, sorry, no name there.
Pat and Lauren are both have their hands
Lauren,
raised.
Sorry. Looking very lovely right now.
I was just going to add that, I think that things that would go in the newsletter to update us are things that on social media could probably also be shared. And I think that, I think it's a double whammy there. And that if we're educating the group about what we're all doing, the public will want to know as well. And so I think that, the work that goes into telling the story to each of us can also go into, outreach into the larger public, the people of California.
I saw him someplace. Did he leave us? There you go. Pat, did you have your hand up? Oh, it's George. I'm sorry, it's Larry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to remind folks that Kevin and his team, I think, write the daily stem seller, which I would suggest all board members find a way to subscribe to, because it is actually a very daily, concise disease of the day or therapy of the day description. And I find them very helpful. They're written at a reasonable level, and over time, you get a pretty good education.
If any board members do not currently receive that, let me know so I can sign you up. I try and sign you all up as soon as you become board members. Sometimes I forget. So just let me know if you're not already receiving it.
I don't know how large the stem seller is, but maybe there's one item out of that you insert in a newsletter, and then point back to the stem seller or something like that. JT.
Well, I just wanted all members of the board to know that the stem seller was recognized very recently as one of the top stem cell blogs in the country. And so major kudos to Kevin and the communications team and Kate, everybody who's been working so hard on that. And that's by the way, a great example of plain English descriptions of a lot of things that could be very scientifically complex and difficult to comprehend. So great job by the team on that.
And I want to point out as well, JT, they are also really increasing the kind of outreach they do on LinkedIn. That's the professional, so to speak. But I also like the fact that they're sharing more stories, more impact with patients from that level, as opposed to, the heavy duty science at the top. And I think that that's really great. So they are doing increased work and trying to put plan into action, but that should be noticed.
Isabel, can I just ask a totally separate question quickly before we run out of time here? Getting back to Art's comments and the intern from Senator Hernandez's office, we spend obviously a tremendous amount of time trying to get messages across about all the great things that CIRM does, the incredible scientists around the state are doing, et cetera. But there's also, I think, a responsibility to hit on some of the not so positive topics, particularly stem cell tourism, to be able to describe to the public what that's all about and how it can be very harmful, et cetera. What's the current thinking of the team on, if anything, on that particular topic at the moment?
Well, we regularly blog about that, and we regularly write articles if there's kind of updates, like when, say, Paul Knopfler and does a study or a survey of how many clinics are out there, or reports on these. If the FDA cracks down on one of these clinics, we report on those. And so any chance we get, we'd write about those.
So
the greatest opposition we have received is from the Board of Medical Quality Assurance for the state of California. It's dominated by doctors that don't want to have these issues raised. And no matter how hard Jeff Lomax, I know, has been working on this, as have I with him, no matter how many times we try to raise it, they just point a deaf ear. So I've been in conversations with Senator Toni Atkins, who is the president pro tem of our state Senate. One of her appointees to the board has been very vocal about these issues. So we'll continue to press them, but it's not been easy when doctors are protecting doctors.
Thank you, Art. Thank you for all you and Jeff are doing on that. And for all the messaging, Kevin, that you do in the blog. It's a very important thing to educate the public on, because it's not only important informationally, but it's important from a safety reason, just to keep people from falling prey to these clinics that are out there that take advantage of desperate families and patients across the state, let alone the nation, et cetera.
David Higgins has his hand raised.
David?
You're on mute, David.
I just wanted to, this is a note for Art. Toni is my representative or in the Senate, and she's also a neighbor. So if you need any help talking to her, let me know.
Go tackle her across the lawn. Is that what you're talking about, David? Sorry, I didn't say that.
Thank you.
I think we've got just a few minutes. Shall we see, Marie, if there's anybody in the public who has comments?
Don't see anyone on from the public. And there are no hands raised.
Okay. Well, with that said, I want to thank everybody for joining for this robust conversation. I hope that the communications team felt that it was very helpful. And of course, we will be here for you. I'm not sure when is our next meeting. Does somebody know?
We have not yet scheduled it, but we can work offline to get that done as well.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thanks,
and,
everyone.
Have a good week.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Madam Chairman.
Bye.